Welcome to the latest episode of Crushing Doubt. I am here with Julie Conrad, as always. Julie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. You hanging in there with everything? It's crazy times.
Yeah, crazy times. Crazy times are pretty normal now. So.
They are. It's creating a lot of doubt in people, I'm sure. But as you know, I think that's pretty much everywhere. So that's actually one of the topics I wanted to talk about today. There's these messages that we get in society about, and they're not just from society, they're even just within ourselves, about whether we want to be an individual or whether we want to be part of like a collective. And I know you talk a lot about that in your work, as you've made reference to. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We talk a lot about, as you look at yourself as an individual, but also part of, we're the microcosm of the macrocosm. So we are individual, but everything that we do affects the whole. So a lot of work goes into digging deep within ourselves through yoga, Ayurveda, all the Eastern work that I personally do, but also that I teach. And we focus on really looking at the depths of who we are, but also how we can take that individual self and work within a collective.
I think that's the hard part for everybody. I don't know if you'll agree with this, and if you don't, we'll talk about it later, and I'll set you straight. I'm just kidding. But I really think it's a very hard thing to bridge, how to be an individual, how to be a part of collectives, and then we also have multiple collectives that we're part of. We have different groups we feel we belong with, and then I'm sure you've had this happen where you're hanging out with one group of friends, and then you're with another group of friends, and they know you in a different light. And what I found to be a very healing journey, and that my symptoms helped me with, is how to be one person all the time. And this episode is a particularly good time to talk about this because the guest that we're having on is a patient of mine, and I used to feel when I was doing my training that there was like a therapist me and personal me. And it took me a while to work towards, no, I want there to be one me. And, now I have this fantasy sports show also. And when I first started that, speaking of doubt, I thought, my patients are really going to be turned off by this. They're going to think I'm crazy and they're going to see me this way. And I was thinking about all the ways that different people were going to see me. And I guess in some ways that's part of the struggle to get out of the collective. Collectives can be great, but they can cause doubt if you feel sucked in by them. Like the therapeutic community, it's not something that most therapists do. Go do a fantasy sports show and talk about your views on things. So there was a lot to work out in that, to get out of the collective. I found the same thing with my family growing up. I love my family, but we have, there's a collectivism there, a groupthink, and I don't think the same as them about lots of things. I do think the same way as them about lots of things too, and finding that balance is hard. So it's just interesting having a patient come on and merge these two worlds a little bit, even though this is a professional podcast in relation to the work that I do with her. And the other thing is she is a comedian. So she knows my funny side. And you can't, I don't go into therapy sessions cracking jokes all the time. It's not the best idea, but I do let my humor be part of things. So I think when it comes to resolving doubts, a lot of what I work on is becoming ourselves. So, the idea of letting your freak flag fly. That's total tongue twister. So,
though I have to interject something though. Don't you think it's interesting that, oftentimes that would be great if we could just live our life just being that one definition of the one hat that we wear, and it's appropriate everywhere. But I'm sure there's certain times where it's not appropriate, or some people may feel that, well, there is a certain, respect level that I demand in the classroom per se, where,
sure,
that they don't they know what their vulnerabilities are, or they also understand who they really are. And that's over here. And then it's almost like being a parent, right? Because I can't just be myself when I need to be the authoritative mom, but they still know who I am.
Well, right. And so I think I'm talking about two things that I think fit with what you're saying. There's knowing who you are inside yourself. And that's the part that I mean about staying in the same place. I'm very different in different situations. You're different at a funeral than you are at a wedding.
Right.
Not,
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yep.
We always have to adapt. And I haven't changed being radically different. It's not like I'm now half comedian in sessions.
Well, I think what maybe you're saying is that there isn't a friction within your psyche about
Bingo. Yes.
who you are in, with certain people. And I think this year we've all really come to terms with, in a political sense, here are my beliefs. Maybe my family has a totally different opinion, and how can I sit with myself and be comfortable with myself as I listen to views that are completely different? Or just coming to the terms that, wow, this is a totally different, there's a divide in the road that I never saw before. And I think that's caused a lot of pain this year.
Hugely. I couldn't agree more, and I actually had it in my notes to talk about politics in this way, even though
let's not talk about politics. We've had enough of that.
No. I'm not talking about the specifics of politics because it leads to such friction, really. Yeah. But actually, that's the point. I've been in conversations with people where I say my position and I get attacked from both sides, and it happens all the time. It happens all the time to virtually anybody. I feel like we've not grown enough as a country to be able to talk about politics in a way without judging each other.
Well, and that goes back to how we feel about ourselves, doesn't it? It keeps going back to that. And where, I spend most of my time in research and learning is that, this collective discomfort, unease, and almost, quite frankly, hatred for ourselves at certain levels has contributed. I mean, this is just kind of my personal take on things, to the shift in everything in every part of the world. From everything that we're dealing with is just that we are a very unhappy people. And we're finding out that we have a lot of personal work to do. And that's your mission, and my mission is to help people with that, because it is a lot to do all by yourself. And anyone that's watching and understands that, they're hurting, not just physically, but mentally, it's any kind of little bit of work that you're doing to get to know and understand yourself better that is going to be not only healing for you, but in your interactions with everyone in that collective that Dan's talking about, right? That you have this pride that you're doing the best that you can, and that you're always working towards figuring yourself out just a little bit more every day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just want to add something that I know you'll agree with also. It's building on that, that when we go onto Facebook, we look at what everybody's doing. Mm-hmm. And there are many, many people on Facebook who, and they may just be expressing joy in some way, but when they express some joy or happiness, sometimes we can look and think, why do they have that? I don't have this. And it becomes this comparison. And I do think that in addition to being struggling to break out of collectivism, we also have a very strong pressure in our society, at least in America, to be individuals in some way. And it's okay to do that. And in some ways it's great.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is.
To stand there and be confident in, I mean, some people, man, they're so good at it, and they've been good at it their whole life. They just, they're just very comfortable.
You and I just ran into this the other day because we are going through this experience of putting this podcast out there. Mm-hmm. there's so much feedback, which we appreciate. We like hearing about it, but we're kind of in a bubble together as we're trying to figure out how we're doing this and how we're looking at this, and how do we bring out our individualism? How do we fit into different collectives? You know, there are people who are the pain sufferers, and they'll tell me how they're seeing this, and there are people who this is totally new to them, and they tell me how they're seeing it. And so we get it from all these different angles. And I think one of the things to work on, especially with respect to doubt, is how can we get to a place where we can not only trust ourselves, but trust like a process. It's something that you and I have built together and are still building. That we know we have to be able to come to each other and say,
yep,
I'm freaked out about this, or this person said this, and now I think this. And I love that we do that for multiple reasons, but one of the reasons I love it is I think anybody who's in a position like we are on this show that's trying to help people grow, we need to let them know we are growing. We are also doing it.
And it's such a perfect comparison, what you're talking about, the individual and the group, right? Because you and I are both trying to put forth, our experience and share it with you, the audience, and understanding that you're all coming from a separate walk of life, different perspectives, different views from, not only the clinical side, but the personal side to, all of these different angles, and that our openness to understanding that together we're all in a journey of healing, is what makes it really special, and that it isn't a your thing, my thing, it's our thing. And that to me is what heals the planet.
Well, I was thinking, I agree with you that I want to make sure I have it right, but the idea of collectivism as a healing thing, it sounded like what you were talking about there. The interesting thing is, I think there's also a healing in the individual connection with yourself.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I think it has to start there. In order for us to feel connected, we have to be secure within who we are as a person. And we are never just who we are, because our experience, we're a living, breathing creature, is going to change every single day. So it's a continuation of understanding self, uncovering and experiencing, practicing. I always say you're practicing being a human being. You've never done this before that you can remember. So, some people will say that their life is an act of remembering. And that's one perspective. Another perspective is that we are experiencing this day by day, experience by experience. And if we just assume that this is it, this is what we got, this is the life that we chose, and just end it there, then there's more suffering in my eyes, because there's much more to unearth and a richness that a lot of people miss. And it's
when
sad.
I think about it, I agree, very, very. And I think in many ways this podcast and this work that I do with doubt and that you do with Ayurveda, I think it's what you said. It's syncing up the internal self with the external self. It's syncing up the collective self with the individual self. And you can't always be in sync, but I think if that's the goal, it's actually syncing up the bodily self with the mind self, which is just
right.
one
It's
thing.
all those layers of self, and it's very easy to get confused in the world that we live in, like you were saying, with social media, with comparison, with all of the challenges that are out there. I mean, for us to say, you just have to, know yourself and dig around. I understand. It is not,
we're
not
even
super
taught
easy.
to doubt. We're taught to doubt because parents, we all mean well as parents. But one of the things that is a challenge is to get to a place where we can listen to our kids and not squash whatever it is that they're feeling or where they're growing,
And if they
'cause
can
we
grow
do,
from doubt, if they're taught, if we can teach our children to grow from doubt, that is a very different approach to doubt, I feel, than the negative side of what doubt can do to us.
yeah, like when people ask kids, what do you think about this? And they say, I don't know. Usually the answer is, what do you mean you don't know? Well, you should be allowed to not know. And I think that's
It's
a big
comforting.
part
I
of,
think sometimes it's comforting when people say, I don't know, because
it's
then that
extremely
leaves
comforting.
room for opportunity.
As a therapist, I had to learn that when people ask me, what do you think about this? I don't know actually is not only an acceptable answer, it's often the answer. That doesn't mean we don't know anything, but we start off not knowing.
Right.
It's an exploration. So up next we're gonna explore what my process was like with Katie. Speaking of somebody who came in not knowing something, that's true of anybody who comes to see me. It's true of anybody, period. So she's going to join me and talk about that experience. But I want to remind everybody to subscribe to our YouTube channel and search Crushing Doubt when you go there. Sign up for our newsletter at crushingdoubt.org for updates on upcoming shows, my seminars, and the release of my upcoming book, which I've been saying for years and years and years, but it is coming soon, I promise. I'm here with one of my favorite TMS recoverers, Katie Haller. She is also a comedian. Katie, where can people find your work?
So on my website at katiehallercomedy.com, and then on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok at Haller at You. HALLERYOU.
It's great. We don't usually have former sufferers come on and have this also be a promo, but it is.
Yeah.
This is great.
Hey,
So, Katie, you were one of the early people who came to see me. You didn't know this, of course, but
nope.
You were one of the early, and if you had, you would have run screaming from the room probably. But I wanted to hear a little bit about your story now that you look back on it. First of all, when was it that you came in? Do you recall around when that was?
Yeah. So I think it was around 2014, 2015. And it might have been a little earlier. It was somewhere 2013, 2014. I had been I moved to New York, and within like 6 months, I started developing like this lingering knee pain on my right knee. And it just kind of was like this dull, like heavy, it didn't feel like, oh, I pulled something. It was just kind of this, I just didn't know what it was. And so I remember, my mom being like, oh, one of our family friends is an orthopedic surgeon. He'll take a look at it. And I went and got an MRI, and they were like, oh yeah, you have some chondromalacia patellofemoral syndrome, which just sounds terrifying. And they diagnosed me with something. And then it was like, patella. So I'm combining the two things, but they were scary sounding. And I remember specifically my pain getting worse after that diagnosis. So I went to physical therapy, and then I remember my right knee starting to feel better. And then all of a sudden, of course, my left knee starts hurting. And they were like, oh, it's probably because you've been compensating. So now you probably have damaged your left knee. So I was like, great. I'm like 24. Like, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just not really progressing. And I remember being in a physical therapist that was very like, it was like they just kind of babied you, and they were like, oh, you should be careful, make sure to ice. And like, I just never felt like, okay, I'm actually strong enough to like not be here. So then once my knees started getting better, I got like a little bit of relief. And then one day I woke up and couldn't move my neck, and had never had any pain like that ever in my life. It was like, I couldn't even brush my teeth. And I went to a chiropractor, and he helped adjust me, but then I was just in so much neck pain for a long time. And then I went to physical therapy for that and got an MRI, and they were like, oh yeah, you have a disc herniation in your neck. So like, it was just a matter of like, 1 or 2 years where I was very young, but I was having all of these in what I thought at the time were real like injuries or ailments that was like they just got worse as I was progressing. And I just felt like stuck in physical therapy and got to a point where I was just so depressed that I just realized like whatever's happening to me physically, like there has to be something emotional going on, because it doesn't, like, I didn't, people are like, what, did you get in a bad accident or something? And I'm like, no, like I'm 4'11". I'm not like, you know, like I'm not a football player. I'm not like, you know.
I think I remember you saying to me this phrase. That's a kind of phrase that I've used before on this stuff too. You were saying, I feel like a 95-year-old woman. You were 24 years old.
And I was like,
and that's how I felt.
And I knew every single elevator in every New York City subway. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah, that's a sign that something is amiss.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you come to find me? Do you recall that?
Yeah, so I remember looking up, I think I Googled like psychosomatic pain, and like I think it was on Psychology Today, and you were one of the first people that came up. So great SEO. And yeah, and I remember calling and we had like a conversation and then set up our first appointment. And I do remember like our first one, like I remember you saying specifically like what I'm about to say, you're not going to believe today. And I think that really was a helpful thing. And I think is like crucial for anyone who's getting treated for TMS to just be prepared or aware of the fact that like this is going to feel very foreign, and almost like I've read so many books about it at this point, and how a lot of therapists talk about how people are like almost offended at this diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Whereas I was getting treated for so long that I was like, if it's just me being insane, just tell me that. At least I know.
Just lay it on me.
Just let me fix this.
So, all right, that's certainly helpful for me to keep in mind, that is the kind of thing that I will say to people, because actually, so the podcast is called Crushing Doubt, and you have to allow for doubt before it can be crushed. So yes. that's part of what we talk about.
I remember you saying, you were like, you're not going to believe me, but you're not injured. And I was like, what do you mean? I have all these MRIs. And you were like, just
okay, but as I recall, you were pretty wide open. You really wanted to hear it, but you were so scared. That was one of the things. Doubt. I talk about this a lot. Doubt is the emotional form of doubt is fear.
Yes.
And you had a lot of fear. I remember you saying like, I can't walk up the stairs without being afraid that I'm going to injure myself. Do you remember you had like a magic pair of shoes?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had like, I was so specific about my shoes. Like I would bring like running sneakers to change into like Converses. Like,
yep. Right. And you knew.
Shit.
I remember you would say to me, like, I know this doesn't make sense, but it doesn't seem to hurt as much with these shoes. And that's another thing that I talk with people about is you've got to get over your idiosyncratic belief system that has been fed by experience potentially, because TMS is operating on your mind. So it'll go along with things like that. So when do you first remember feeling some hope about this?
I think it was definitely within a few weeks. And I remember like, I don't think I've ever read a book as quickly as I did the first John Sarno book that you referred. And I think that was, I think if you were a patient, if I had been a patient that like had gone to you once a week or something, but I didn't like do the research and I didn't fully understand, because what the book did was explain in very digestible medical terms how it's physically possible. And I remember like the logic of it actually making sense to me finally, like, and you explained it to me in the sessions as well. Like when you get embarrassed, your skin flushes, or like when you're nervous, you sweat, or like some people break out in hives, like all of these physical things that happen to like as a direct result of an emotion, it was like, it made so much sense that somebody with a personality type that puts a lot of pressure on themselves and represses anger and has all these, like, the fact that anger could be the physical thing that I'm feeling, and understanding the like oxygen deprivation to the muscles can create this exact sensation of what was going on. Like it just made sense to me. Whereas I think a lot of the time people hear psychosomatic pain and they're like, so you're just saying it's like some magic voodoo shit and you can just like wish it away. And it's like, no, there's actual science that has gone into this. And like,
yeah. And it's a real physical, it's a real physical thing.
Yeah.
So that brings me to, I remember there was a kind of key turning point towards the beginning, because this didn't take that long, as I recall, to get you to a much better place about it. You were on a trip. Do you remember this? You were in LA, and you had just had a discussion with your dad, I think.
Yep, my cat.
Now we can reveal as much or as little about this as you'd like, but I remember that being a turning point because we pinpointed your emotional experience with a flare-up, and that's something that I often look for. Now, I should say there are some people who say to me, "Well, I can't do that because it's chronic; it's always there." That's where you work on doubt, because that will make it not be there all the time.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the first like thing that I started doing was like just shifting when I would wake up and not being like, what hurts me today? What did I do? Like just telling myself like, I'm not injured. I'm not injured. I know it hurts, but I'm not injured. Like I would just say that to myself over and over, and the pain started getting a little bit less. So that, like you just said, when there is a flare up and your brain immediately goes to, I was like, what shoes was I wearing? Like, did I go up too many stairs? Like all this stuff. Did I overdo it, in that 10 minutes on the elliptical? Like all these things that logically don't make sense. And then I remember you being like, is there anything that happened this week, like emotionally? And I remember like saying the thing about my dad, and you just made that parallel. And that was like definitely the first flare up, very obvious thing. And I think in the years that we worked together it took a while, but like am able to figure out what is the parallel. And sometimes I can't immediately, but it always reveals itself. Right.
So that was a big leap forward, and I think it really helps people to feel that there's proof when they see it in themselves. This really did happen. And so then, moving on from there, one thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is a lot of times people think that you read Sarno, you understand TMS, the pain evaporates, and then you're done. And you can have those experiences of pain evaporating when you get the right thing, but there's also plenty of times where people need to kind of do maintenance.
Oh yeah.
They just need to think. And so can you talk a little bit about what that's been like for you as we've continued to work together?
Yeah. Well, so I think when it comes, like in terms of maintenance, I think what happens eventually is, and I remember like you using the analogy of it's like your body is, you have like figured out this like magic trick, or like not magic because that sounds too nice for what it is, but like you figured out you're onto it. And now it's like, if I get knee pain, I'm like, no, I don't believe that anymore. So then, and like that was one of the things again in Sarno that helped me to be like, or maybe you said this or Sarno, I don't know. But the idea of if everything hurts, then it means that nothing is actually wrong. I remember that specifically being like, if things are moving around. And do you remember the cankles? I think
I actually almost brought up the cankles, but I thought I'd leave that to you.
You'll leave it to me. Okay. Yeah. Emotional cankles are a thing.
Yeah. See, tell the story.
So that was the first like crazy symptom that I had. And I remember that being definitely within the first like three months. And I like my knee pain had been better. I hadn't had a neck spasm in a while. And I was like, I'm doing great. Like, I think I really nailed this thing. And then I wake up and my feet and like it was just so I could barely put my shoes on. And I was like, what is happening? Like, I hadn't been on an airplane. Like, there was no, I wasn't pregnant. Like, there was no reason for my legs to be that swollen. And I remember I remember like texting you frantically. And when we had a session, you explained that this had happened, you know, in like with a couple other patients you were working with. Like, once you start to realize the way that your mind is tricking you with the pain, other symptoms can pop up and begin to present themselves. And when it's new, that makes you doubt it more, because you're like, what is this? But what if it's not TMS?
Right.
Yeah. And
right.
I think in the last few years, like I have had multiple flare-ups that have like my skin, like, remember there was like the horrible hormonal acne phase, which was definitely TMS related as well. And then,
right. And we, you know, we kind of had to figure out each one, but leading the charge was me saying, look, and this is my rule of thumb, you know this well, if the body can do it for purely physical reasons, then it can be co-opted to do it for TMS reasons. And that's why even seemingly bizarre symptoms like cankles can be emotional cankles. And,
right.
you know, anytime there would be occasional times where I'd say, okay, let's have you go to a doctor just to make sure there's nothing. But I was sure, because it was just all behaving like TMS. So
yeah. And that was, and I do remember you, I think that was crucial. I remember there was a period where we had started, but I was not comfortable just not going to physical therapy anymore. Like, I had to wean myself off. And I do remember I did switch to a different physical therapist who was incredible. And she was like, I'm going to get you out of here. She was like, you're going to be fine. And that in and of itself was super helpful. Just like a physical therapist being like, you're good. Like, but I do remember, like, I was never told, like, you're done now, like, you're fully healed. I just stopped going.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me probably like 5 months maybe to feel like, oh, I can just decide that I'm fine.
Well, Katie, thank you for coming on. You know, I want to talk to you further about this. Maybe we'll have you on for a full episode at some point, because we have a lot of history together, and you illustrated so many really great points about the experience, you know, the symptom imperative of it changing from one thing to another, the fact that the reassurance made as big a difference as it did. These are, and you know, these are all really big factors for people watching. And the maintenance also, I think, is important, that it's not necessarily heavy duty work all the time, but you got to stay aware and keep thinking about these things.
And I think, because you know, there are a lot of people that, I think if your nature is to internalize and to, like, not necessarily express anger all the time, and to kind of, if you're a people pleaser, like all of those personality traits, you know, you're still going to be that type of person. And I sort of look at therapy as, it's like the difference between thinking about eating dinner versus actually eating it and feeling full. Like, you can think about, like, this is stressing me out, it's probably like causing me pain, like, yeah, that's probably like, and I've done that, but that has never actually made a flare up go away. Like, either talking to you or actually figuring out and just confronting it head on myself is the only thing that has. So, like, I look at that as maintenance. Like, sometimes I'm just like, oh man, if I don't confront my sister, I'm going to get a neck spasm. And, like, that's the reason I do it. Like, I don't want to have that confrontation, but I know I'm going to wake up and, like, not be able to move my neck. So I'm like, I have to.
I'm pretty sure I've said this to you, and we'll finish up on this, but you know, your TMS symptoms are often trying to get you to do things that are good for you. And that's just what you said. So that's a great way to highlight it. And I feel like we could talk for hours about this, as we
seriously.
have. But we'll do more. And thank you for coming on, Katie. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Man, I can relate to being in my 20s and having a whole bunch of physical stress responses to what was going on in my life at the time. So I feel like I can relate to Katie so well.
Yeah, that line she uses about being, I can't remember actually if she said it in the interview or not, actually. But she said when she came to see me, and I think she said it in the interview too, that she felt like a 90-year-old woman. And I used to describe that to people.
Yeah, when you feel like your body's falling apart.
But
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't feel like a 90-year-old woman, but I did feel like a 90-year-old man. And I was like 29.
Yeah, it's scary.
Just crazy.
It's really scary. I mean, I love working with teenage girls that are going into college because I drill that into them of all of the fear and anxiety that they're going to experience just adulting, that not to be afraid of these things, because if someone would have told me that man, your body can do some crazy things when you're stressed out and you're out there living your life for the first time on your own.
What did you go through? I don't think we've talked about the specifics.
I remember feeling like I was holding onto the steering wheel like as hard as I could going through life, that everything tightened up. And I would have, in college, I would have crazy, I'd have numbness in my hands. I would have nosebleeds. I would have all these kind of crazy things, but mostly they were, panic attacks, anxiety attacks, all of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, it was intense. It was intense. My dad was really there for me during that time sitting out. I was actually thinking the other day of when I was sitting out in my hallway in my dorm room crying to him, and he must have talked to me for like 2 hours trying to calm me down.
Mm-hmm. Well, dads and moms can be the best.
They can.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I look back at my suffering, I didn't just have the back pain. Like you, I had all these various forms of suffering. Mm-hmm. And it really related to these things. And with Katie, the same was true also. This was not, sometimes people tend to come to me when they're in their most extreme versions of it. And she was. But she had things before, and she's had things since. So actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about is that in the work that I do with someone like Katie, one thing that I find is that we resolve the pain actually often very quickly. I want to be clear about that, though. It doesn't always happen quickly. People freak out about that when they hear that. They say, well, what's wrong with me that I'm not getting so quickly better? But one thing I think Katie speaks to in the interview is it is a process, and it'll come and go. But I wanted to reach more people, so I started to develop a short-term model as well. And it's really, these are short-term consultations. They're not, they're 2 to 4 sessions. They're not designed to cure you of pain in 2 to 4 sessions necessarily. Sometimes we get lucky or we make a huge amount of progress in that short amount of time. But what they're really designed to do is to tell you your TMS story. What's happening? What's happening between you and yourself that's leading to these things? And so as I explored this, I came to understand different parts of the experience that I knew before. When Katie came to see me, we talked about emotion and doubt. That was my key point. But since then, I've seen that power is another aspect of things. The ability to relate to yourself well, the ability to relate to the world well in a way that makes you feel powerful, and even the ability to relate to your symptoms well. Because most people feel very unpowerful in relation to their symptoms. So when people come to see me, I do these things called mind-body maps, where you divide it into 4 columns. One is emotions, another is doubt, a third is power, and then the 4th is action steps, which I'm even thinking of renaming, because a lot of it is really about how to think right about it. Mm-hmm. So we're going to, over the next 4 episodes, we're going to talk about each column. And actually, Julie came up with this idea, and I thought it was great. So today we're going to talk about the emotions column. What that's about is helping to articulate and identify your main emotional themes as they pertain to symptoms. And as a result, if you understand those, the way I look at it is you could create, like, let's say, 12 themes that cover the broad base of your experience. And those are the buckets you can look in when you have a new symptom.
I like that.
So when
So
people,
it's almost
not
like,
just the new symptom,
I'm looking here, that maybe that means that it's related to my panic about, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, when I have a new symptom or an uptick in an old symptom, the first place I go is what's happening for me, not physically, emotionally. So one of the things I talk about is thinking emotionally. And what I mean by that is put your emotions first in your thought process. Don't think, what is wrong with my body here? Now, look, if there's something like that feels really seriously wrong, go to a doctor, of course. But if really short of that, you want to start thinking emotionally. You want to start thinking, what just happened? So one of my rules of thumb is that the timing is never an accident. Now, I interface with a lot of different people about this, and somebody was saying to me, but my symptoms don't match up with timing, because when I go through something bad, I basically go numb. And I don't disagree with that. Obviously, I don't disagree with that person on their experience, but I mean, I don't disagree with the fact that can happen. But even so, if you have the symptom at the time that you come back from numbness, that's still an emotional experience. And maybe you can trace it back by knowing these intellectual buckets to look in. So
couldn't it be several even days later?
Sure. It could be years later.
Yeah.
I very frequently am not so present when it is happening. But here's the thing. My body is. That's the great thing about the body. I understand with dissociation, you're not present in your body. So you may not feel it, but your body is still enacting it. It's there. The body does not dissociate. So if you find yourself not really present, when you have you start to feel hazy, you're bothered by something. Your mind isn't really there for what happened. You have to be able to think back. And that's where we use the emotions column. The emotions column it's like an intellectual hack. You know your emotional themes. So you can look at a situation and think, did something go on there that relates to one of my emotional themes? One of my emotional themes is basically not being heard. A lot of people have this. However, and this is something that I want to say is really important in emotional columns work and just in my work in general, I look for the broadest theme with the most specific articulation you can get. So I wouldn't just want to look in the bucket of, oh, people don't hear me. I would want it to be more specific, like, people don't hear me even when I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, and I think it's very obvious. And so if I'm in an emotional experience, and let's say it's a small thing, and I start to get pain, maybe it's a small event, but it relates to a big theme. So part of the idea of this column and that work is to organize the experience. Because so much of what happens is there's too much happening. And people ask me this too. They say, well, how am I supposed to know which emotion it is? I think that when you have them listed out in front of you, and really built into your mind, because the idea is to build the mind-body map into your mind and have it be kind of an automatic thing, you can figure it out. Now, there are times where more than one is happening at once. In my experience, there's usually a dominant theme that's coming to the surface. But look, it can be more than one thing. We know emotional life is complicated. But it's in studying the body that we can figure out a lot of what is going on for us. I like, this is another debate that I often have with people, a helpful debate, where the idea is that, they experience their body as the enemy because the symptoms hurt so much. And they make them so uncomfortable, and they make them so worried, and they won't go away. And so how would you not see it as the enemy? But what I've come to see is that the body refuses to ignore our hurts. It won't do it. And if we can learn to embrace that, then we can get to a place where the information becomes useful. I don't know if that fits with your work in Ayurveda or what that's like.
It makes sense to me in what I've actually gone through in my own healing journey, and understanding the physical reactions in my own body as, my sympathetic nervous system was just, shot. And, so much can just the idea, you saying, if someone says, oh, I don't know which emotion it is. In my case, I didn't need to identify what the emotion was, just knowing that it was emotion that was connected.
Right. A lot of times that is enough.
Yeah. And for me, over time, I would begin to understand as I peeled back each layer of what was probably more important than understanding just that there was, an emotion. It was just that I will get to what that emotion is as I work through my practice of simply doing the work, doing the things that I need to do to be aware. And the self-awareness, and that's where, people will go to meditation or they'll go to just stillness so that they can understand, because you can get very specific about what you want people to do. But what people need to understand is that it takes a while to even be able to sit with yourself quietly, to give yourself permission to have time to sit quietly and discover that there is feeling going through the body, and then following that to understand that, oh, there is an emotion behind it. Because I've worked with people that have no connection to this understanding of how do I get in? When am I going to know this stuff is working? And the beauty of that is, if the person has a commitment to self, if they have commitment to getting there, you won't have to tell them when they got there. They'll know they got there.
They'll just know. Right. And here's the other thing. One of the central doubts that people deal with is, does this even make sense? Can it even be made sense of? And I've been working at this for a long time, certainly with myself, but also professionally. And one thing that I have been so relieved about is that it does make sense. Mm-hmm. I can tell you some of the longest lasting symptoms I've had that I thought made no sense whatsoever did. I just couldn't see how.
Well, and here's the thing, and this is hard saying to a psychologist is what you do, but I also feel like people don't necessarily need to understand how exactly intricately these things work. They just need. I agree. Yeah, I mean, and that's why you do what you do, because you understand it because you've gone through it. You just happen to also have a beautiful background in how the brain works and how the psyche works.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, I have to say, there are times where I get frustrated with the therapy world because it can go on and on and on. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's inherently bad. You can take years to figure something out. That's okay. And if it's working for you, great. You're not going to find me not a supporter of therapy. But I will say this. I think that the therapist's job is to, or at least part of their job, is to not just let it go on and on and on where you are obsessively looking for the answers, especially if the person's getting relief anyway. Mm-hmm. And so really when it comes down to it, my mind doesn't matter. Your therapist's mind doesn't matter. Nobody's mind matters but your own when it comes to these things.
Well, I'm always telling people these things too, that, you as a human being that has been experiencing your body your entire life already knows what works and doesn't work on a very fundamental level. And by having some simple tools to bring those things to light, oftentimes what I want to hear, and the times that I have heard it, it's just changed everything, is that the trust of whatever it is that you're doing, that you don't need validation that it works if it's working for you.
Right. It's a trusting yourself when it comes down to it. And we are not nearly as good at that as we wish we were or should be or even say we are. There are so many times, and we're about to come up on the questions. Some people have started to ask more questions, and I want to make sure to get them on the show. All of these people have questions, and very frequently they're coming to me saying, you'll have the answer. And while I do have good answers, I have potentially helpful answers, which is different than I have the answer. Mm-hmm. I happen to think very highly of my answers, but that doesn't mean, part of the reason I think that is for me. They work for me. Mm-hmm. I will adapt if it doesn't work for you, or, because I have to, and I want to anyway. So let me bring up a couple of questions that I got asked. I really loved this one. I'm going to start with the one that's shorter, because I think the second one we have a debate coming, it sounds like. So we'll get to that. One of the questions I got, I think it was for episode 3. How do we reconcile the fact that we have the power to cure the symptoms with the possible interpretation that we are blaming the victim? Such an important question that I felt we really had to bring it on the show. So here's the way I think about it. We don't have that much to do with how our symptoms came to be, or even with how we came to be. We're born these innate creatures. Then we have these experiences. We didn't create any of it. We made some decisions along the way that were the best decisions we could make with the situation, but we did not create this situation. And part of the situation that we didn't create is we did not create the situation of not knowing the right information. So once you have the right information, you have the power to change the symptoms without bearing the responsibility for having had them in the first place. You also do not have responsibility if you can't make them go away right away, or if you can't make them go away at all. It's not your responsibility. It is the responsibility of people who are supposed to be helping you and giving you the right information. So my answer to it is, I find a lot of times people end up with symptoms because of good things in their personality. Like they're trying to do their best. They're trying not to bring their problems to other people, and they just implode on themselves. So I not only don't blame people for this, I usually think it's a sign of some good mental health in a lot of ways. But information can get you past that. Does that make sense to you, Julie?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And that idea of, or even just saying, the victim, we're all in a sense, victims in some way, but
victims
we're
of
all vulnerable.
Humanity.
Right?
Right.
We're all experiencing these things, and I think that's such a heavy word.
Yeah, but I think, and I don't even think the person who asked the question used that word, but I brought up the kind of extreme version of it just to bring it up. I mean, I know people who they're so mad at themselves that they have this. Mm-hmm. You did not create this. The fact that our society doesn't know these things.
That probably is an indicator of something much deeper.
Exactly.
With that, having that realization.
This is one I want to spend some good time on. Maybe we'll make it a full segment on this. All right, let's move to another question. So this was about scoliosis. I got a question about someone who has scoliosis, and what they were wondering about is it possible for a mind-body situation to cause so much muscle tension that it actually bends the spine, causes scoliosis? And the second part of the question was, does scoliosis cause pain? So, Julie, you said you have scoliosis. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
I have a mild case of it, but my whole family, we have a pretty strong line of heredity in my family for curvy spines.
You have a curved line of it. I'm sorry, I needed to say it.
Right.
So scoliosis, just for people who are wondering, it's a curvature of the spine, and it can happen for different reasons.
And there's two kinds of scoliosis. So what this person is asking is more of the functional scoliosis, which is a tension of the muscle. Or, for example, you were in high school and you carried 75 pounds of books on one shoulder, and you've kind of created an imbalance there in the muscles of the back. But then there's structural scoliosis, which is the actual twisting of the vertebrae of the spine. So, and we all, most of us understand that there is our spinal column, right, that moves through the spine there. So you can get into, first of all, the way I would answer that question is anything is possible. Anything's possible.
Right.
We can't say that no definitively ever about anything in the world is my worldview. But but I understand.
Let me add to that. Well, let me add to that in terms of a general thing. I mean, I like what you're saying, that anything is possible, but I also think that if we apply science and we apply logic, then we can make our best guess. And the thing that I want to be in the mix of science and logic is that a mind-body issue can cause lots of things. Mm-hmm. I say this all the time. My rule of thumb is that if the body can do it for one thing, it can do it for a mind-body reason too. The function's already there. Mm-hmm. So if the spine can curve, it can curve for this reason. If muscles can tense up, they can tense up for this reason. In fact, that's usually what happens. So so we've kind of laid out our general ideas about this. Let's take a little bit of time on the specifics. Based on my studies and my understanding, muscle tension can cause scoliosis. It can pull the spine. But based on the science that I know, scoliosis should not cause pain. Now, there are lots of claims that it does. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying where I come in, I have to assume that there can be mind-body work that can be done, and then we see. Sometimes we cure it all the way. And the fact that we can cure it all the way for some people, that makes me think we can cure it all the way for all people. That's just my thinking, but let's debate. Julie, what do you have to say about it?
Well, my take on that is I do agree that our the energy around our thoughts can affect the intensity level of discomfort and pain. But a twisting spine that's putting pressure anywhere on the internal organs or the nerves of the spine, this is a serious illness that requires surgery for many children and many people. And as technology gets better, my mom had spinal fusion in the 70s. They didn't really know what they were doing back then. They had a pretty good idea, but
that's okay. They don't know what they're doing now.
Yeah,
we'll debate it more, but yeah,
they've come. Well, let me just say, in the world of scoliosis, they have come an incredibly long way. But let me just focus on, in the scope of what we're talking about, a really great example of this mind-body work in preventing the exacerbation of any sort of pain that you might have. So my daughter has scoliosis, and she had it to such a degree, a 40-degree curvature, which is on the edge of needing surgery. It was scary. And at the time, I was in Ayurvedic school, and we were learning about oil bastis for the back, which is basically, looks like a donut, and it's made of dough. And you place it along the spine, and you fill it with medicated oil. And you let this sit. Now, this is an Ayurvedic practice that's been done in India for years, specifically for spinal pain, lower back pain, all sorts of stuff. So
they do not have this at Dunkin' Donuts. I just wanted to say.
No, you wouldn't want to eat this. No. But I did this practice with her. I thought I just learned this. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm going to do it. So I had some help from my teachers to make sure I first started with 3 of them down her spine. And then I did, 4, sometimes even more, up all the way and all the way down to the tailbone, all the way up. And we started a tradition of every Sunday night, she would lay down. I would build these dough dams on her back. I'd warm the oil. I'd put the oil in there. She'd lay with her head on her hands and watching Gilmore Girls. And it became our thing every single Sunday. We did this for almost 2 years. And when I went back,
how did it work? Yeah.
She had improved 20%.
Okay. But
so
I'm gonna make a
now,
counter-argument.
Dan, let me tell you this. So what happened when I told the doctor, and she's an incredible doctor here in Cleveland. So she's like, I've never seen anything like this. Now, I had already been told in my Ayurvedic school that, when there's a diagnosis and then Ayurveda does something to fix it, it was the wrong diagnosis. It's usually what the Ayurveda is told. But anyway, so the doctor was like, this is incredible. Now, I'm not going to give it total credit to my fancy little dough dams and oil, but she was completely compliant with her brace that she wore at night. That's a big thing. She was compliant. But we also supported it with this. And on the mind-body level, it was so nurturing. Think about it. You're 13 years old.
That's what I'm talking
You're
about.
13 years old. You're in a crazy time of life. But every Sunday, you get to be with mom and get a massage, a back dough dams and massage. Come on, right?
So this is one we have to come back to because there's a lot to discuss about it. But I think we have a lot more overlap than we have disagreement. But we do have some disagreements in there, and that's fine. And it's good for the debate. It's good for us to explore things. I am not a scoliosis expert. You should go to a doctor. Medical doctors are the first line of defense against all of these things. So I don't want to come across too strongly on the other side. At the same time, for people who have doubts that think it's causing pain and maybe it is a mind-body thing, I want to open the door to that. So I've seen a lot of surprising things get cured. So let's keep discussing this, Julie. But these were great discussions. I love that we're having them. We used to just have them on the phone. Now we get to do them on this podcast. It's super fun, and we're learning a lot, and hopefully we are helping people learn a lot. So thanks everybody for watching. This is great, and we're going to revisit a lot of these ideas. Thank you for watching. Please click subscribe, hit like, and ring the bell for notifications on YouTube. Sign up for our newsletter at crushingdoubt.org for information on new episodes and for updates on my live seminars.
You can find us on all social media platforms at Crushing Doubt. For questions you'd like answered, please email info@crushingdoubt.org. To keep our podcast thriving, please consider a donation on Venmo at Crushing Doubt.
I am here to help you first let in, but then resolve your doubts about your healing journey so that you can find powerful, peaceful, and happy living.